An interesting backstory.
I think it's important that everybody knows about the Wizard of Oz.
A professional with decades of experience in her field.
I'm a psychotherapist who works pretty much exclusively with law enforcement officers, as well as other first responders.
Strong opinions and a definite point of view.
What people see on the streets, this job, is not normal.
Brutally honest and funny.
When I get a call in the middle of the night and they've been drinking beer, they're normally crying over a relationship. When they're drinking Jack, they get on the phone and they start off with, "Hey babe."
She identifies problems, probes, pokes, and makes you think.
So if something happens to your family, which is truly your biggest fear, and you haven't thought about every single potential of what could go wrong, then you feel like you failed.
She has her own special style.
You're either part of the problem or part of the solution. Pick a side.
Welcome to StephTherapy911 with Stephanie Samuels.
Hello and welcome to StephTherapy911 with Stephanie Samuels. I have an amazing woman with me today by the name of Amy Morgan. Amy is the founder of an organization called Academy Hour. And if you have not gone to her website and looked at Academy Hour, you have cheated yourself out of truly what law enforcement and what clinicians need to be able to understand what it's like to be a first responder. It is one of the most comprehensive websites, well thought out, and that when I look at it and I think, I think this should be included. And sure enough, whatever I have thought in my head that this should be included, it's there. It's videos for officers to be able to see. It's a course, and God knows we need a course to have culturally competent therapists throughout the United States, because Joe Shit the Ragman cannot do this line of work when it comes to therapy. They are cops and first responders are just not the type of individuals that want to sit with a therapist who's silent, who bullshits in any way. They like somebody who talks, challenges, not as a dick, but is willing to go up against them, because so often, particularly law enforcement, that persona, that uniform, whether they are in it or not, really stops people from challenging. And sometimes that's what officers think they want, but that's exactly what they don't want when they are in a session. When they are coming in for help, they are a population that does not malinger, which is wonderful. I mean, at least for me, I've really lost my ability to be able to see civilians, because I have absolutely no patience to hear about what to me appears to be mundane life events. And they're just motivated because they have not waited. As I always say to them, I'm like, every time they come in, I'm like, so how'd you win the ticket into my office? And then, there's always something. I'm like, because I sure as hell know that you haven't waited your entire life thinking, as soon as I get really good health care, I'm going to go see a shrink. I am the last place that any of them ever thought they were going to end up. So I want you to, because you have just been able to look at all the different pieces, be able to see what first responders need, and put together the most comprehensive program that I've seen. So I want you to I want you to take all of us through. We've got listeners from all over. You always have a nurse that God bless her, from Oklahoma, right by you, who listens in every week. And Amy's out in Oklahoma City herself. So I love, love, love that. And so I want you to take us all through how you ended up with first responders,
Okay.
and and kind of what this is all about.
Okay. So I started out getting my master's degree a little bit later in life, but master's in counseling. My entire life, I wanted to be a child psychologist to give kids the hope that someone cared about them, just based on my own childhood. That's what I grew up wanting to do. And I got a little bit delayed, but got my master's finally in counseling. Was trying to, do my practicum and do counseling with children, and I hated it. Absolutely hated it. Thought I was going to make a difference in the world, and it felt so futile. I was working with the worst of the worst kids that have been in it, kicked out of every possible school and every opportunity, and they were, they're all going to end up in jail just because of the way their behavioral problems, and they were in basically full day treatment. School being just a minor part of it, of their day, just because they needed behavioral therapy more than anything. It felt futile to me because I would work with them so hard and maybe start to make a difference and then send them home, and they would come back the next day just, like they were. So then I changed into doing, I thought I'll change. Let's go to marriage therapy. That's where I can make a difference. I know you're laughing. I was so frustrated by it. I was like, okay, we're in here, we're going to talk about what's wrong. Really, I felt like both people in marriage therapy just come to marriage therapy hoping the counselor will be on their side. Mm-hmm. Both people just want someone on their side. You can't be on both of their sides. And you give a homework and you're like, let's do this week. And, we're going to make a difference. And they come back the next week and I'm like, did you do what we were supposed to do? Well, no. And everything's still wrong. And I'm like, get out. Like, I just don't have the patience for it. I'm listening to things like, he won't pick our towels up off the floor. I don't care. Like, that's just disrespectful. If your spouse wants you to do something, you got to do it. Now get out, problem solved, go. But I was working at the Oklahoma State Bureau of Investigation at the time that I finished my master's, and was had friends all over the agency in different areas, had investigators who would go out to investigate a homicide, and they'd come back and make those jokes that at the time I thought, what the hell, like, what's wrong with these people? They're making jokes about, things that, and we're sitting in the middle of like Pizza Hut, and the 7 or 8 of them are talking, and they're talking about the brain on the sidewalk or whatever. And people around, I was like, shh, people are, they don't think twice. It took me a while to acclimate to the fact that that's just how they cope. But I also have friends I had some friends in the ICAC unit who were telling me about their job, internet crimes against children. And I mean, and they stay about 2 years, and I thought, you know what, I can make, I was the training officer at the time. And so I was bringing in speakers for class and stuff. And I thought, I have my master's in mental health. Like, let me make a class on PTSD. And I specialized in suicide. So trauma and suicide are my kind of areas of expertise, but I put a class on PTSD, and it was like a lunch and learn. And I thought, well, I'll get a couple people. I mean, everybody came to the class. So I created another one. It just became kind of something that I loved doing. I loved working with them. I started to get them. The more time I spent with them, the more I liked it. So I thought, well, you know what, after I left the Bureau, I was doing my own thing somewhere else. And I thought, I'm just going to put a class on. I'm just make a class online. I'm just going to make a little class. Well, I ended up just like loving it. And I started teaching, I started working with law enforcement here in Oklahoma, integrating, going on ride-alongs, just every possible chance I could, just soaking in information and learning and asking them, and really just trying to get to know as much as possible. As I started trying to learn, I actually got to know them personally and working with them. And so then I would go teach on site. I ended up being mental health trainer for a lot of the departments here in Oklahoma, and working with them, and just created an entire catalog of classes that I ended up putting on my website, started a website, and it grew into like a business. I never wanted to start a business, but now I own a business, and that's all I do full time. And so out of all that work, I started listening to them. I'm like, you need to go to a counselor, you need to get help. And I'm like, go to your EAP. And they're like, hell no. And I started learning why. So I started trying to find counselors that I could refer them to, because I do suicide interventions and crisis interventions, and I'm looking for resources. Couldn't find them all over the country. I mean, I'm just trying to find facilities and counselors, and I just couldn't find somewhere to send them. And so I have a trainer mind. And so I thought, well, I can do this. I can train, like maybe I can just kind of create something for counselors. And it turned into, once I got into it, I started researching, I started interviewing every law enforcement guy that I'd ever worked with in any way, saying, what would you want? Why don't you go to a counselor? What do you want from a counselor? What would you, everything I could possibly take in. And I talked to counselors who've worked with responders and kind of gained their expertise and their experience. And I put it all into the Certified First Responder Counselor Program. So now I'm certifying counselors nationally and in Canada to be culturally competent, or at least culturally the beginning of cultural competence, so that they can go and get the experience now. Just when they have a responder come to their office, hopefully they do no harm. Hopefully they do give the responder the feeling that they get them. And so I tell them all the twisted, crazy things that the responders will come in with, and have taught them to not overreact, not to report out of a fear of, they're going to do something. Like, what's normal for a first responder. Out of that, then I started hearing that I started vetting treatment facilities. So we have a treatment facility directory on the site as well, and getting to actually know and going to visit treatment facilities that have first responder programs, first responder only programs, or first responder wings and that sort of thing. They were having trouble with support groups. So I started which is about to be released, online support groups, where I use my graduate counselors to do online support groups for first responders only. No civilians. It's via Zoom, it's nationally. So my graduates that are counselors, experienced counselors who are now culturally competent to work with first responders, are going to be able to provide online support groups for first responders who can't otherwise find them, especially with COVID. You can't go to a group, So in this work, then I started hearing that we were working with a lot of departments that either didn't have a peer support group. So I work with a group called Warriors Rest Foundation here in Oklahoma, who goes around the country doing peer support. I spent the entire day with them today, researching with them. But I started hearing how, we go in and have to help, I go with them a lot, help them either help their peer support program. Some departments' peer support program deal with a crisis or an officer involved shooting or suicide or whatever it happened to be. And I was figuring out, as I'm hearing all of this, that not all peer support groups teams do a great job or know what they're doing. Some departments don't have them. So I decided to go ahead and build a peer support team, a team member and leader certification, to really train them past just the general debriefing, the SISM debriefing. I want them to learn everything that a peer support team member would need to know. And then the person that coordinates or leads the team. And I'm working on an element for command staff leadership to buy in and support the peer support team. And now then I'm going to network the community of the peer support community nationally. They're going to have their own community online with this, like the counselors do. I want to network the peer support graduates with the counselor graduates with the responders that take the online mental health training. How long did I ramble there?
No. You didn't ramble at all. With peer support, one of the frustrating things that we've seen nationally is that not all peer support is created equal. So that you have some peer support where there is 60 hours worth of training. I know the federal guys with ICE or what have you, they get about 15,000 calls a year. So they're clearly doing something right.
Right.
And then you have the peer support that on Wednesday, they were with the gang detail unit. And on Thursday, they're heading up the peer support. So, I think some of it also has to do with kind of what you're doing for therapists. Is, can you actually do a certification program for peer support?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing. So I'm going to train them. They have to pass an exam. They have to renew every year. They have to get CE, the peer support. There's teammate and leader, certified peer support teammate and certified peer support leader. The leader is going to do everything the team member does, but then teach also managing the peer support team, coordinating efforts. A lot of them go into this and are assigned to the peer support team or volunteer for it. They've never managed anybody. They've never been a manager. So managing a team of then volunteers, which is even harder, because you don't have direct authority necessarily. You don't necessarily get to decide their time, how their time is spent, because they may answer to some other department somewhere on a different shift. I want to talk about all of that, all of the managing, all the coordinating, all the things that they get called to do. And I want to train on mental health knowledge, because so many people out there, I think they're like, hey, we want to build a peer support team together. Who wants to do it? Me. Okay, you 10, you volunteered, you're it. And they put them through system and they're like, okay, good luck. And then someone comes to them with a real issue and they're like, we didn't cover this, but I'm the peer support team member. I'm going to try to guess my way through it. Very dangerous. So I'm going to give them at least a foundation of actual how trauma works, how trauma responses work, how PTSD is diagnosed, anxiety, stress, burnout, like all of it, as well as just like handling daily life frustrations, how that affects your mental health, how your physical, your nutritional, all of the things, all the holistic. I want to train on all of that. So the peer support team has the vast knowledge rather than just the, I know how to debrief you. After that, I'm not sure. I want to tell them what to do when they don't know what to do, when to turn it over to, when to refer, when to connect them to what resources. I want to teach them about all the possible resources. It's why I've interviewed CopLine. So it's the whole thing, the whole gamut. I want them to know everything that they can possibly know that should be within their boundaries as a peer support team.
So one of the keys is the selection process.
Yes, that's going to be how to select is going to be a very important part of this training.
Huge.
And
Because
if you've already selected, here's how to tell whether you selected the right people and what to do if you didn't.
right. Because just because
some
you're
of them are already
doesn't
attacked,
mean that that you qualify.
Yeah, like there's an application and we're gonna revamp our peer support team. Let's start over. You can't, you're not stuck with who volunteered. Typically it's like who they got to volunteer and they're just happy someone volunteered and they go from there. Not everybody's meant for this at all. And like I tell with the counselors, not every counselor is meant to be a counselor for first responders. And if you're not, great, don't do it. Same with peer support. Not everyone's meant for that role.
And the key really is that vetting process.
Yes.
Because the validity of every program, I know for CopLine, that is the biggest piece for us is that vetting process. And I remember when the first classes, it was clear that somebody could not grasp what was needed to. And I do remember, that my lead trainer, what have you, had a conversation, what have you. And it's difficult. It's horrible. They pay for their own way. They pay for all of that, and yet the integrity of the lines themselves are dependent on that. And I remember after we had it was the last day, and we were all hanging out, and one of the volunteers that had made it through, and he said, we weren't sure if this was a joke, if no matter what, everybody kind of made it. And he said, you have no idea how you validated your own program, because they all see who's struggling, and and when that doesn't work. So same thing with applicants, is everybody kind of knows who would be appropriate and who wouldn't be, and you can really invalidate your own program
by letting anybody by the one everyone knows shouldn't be on, you going, it's okay, we're going to let him anyway. That ruins everything. Who's going to respect and go to the peer support team? It's the weak link thing. When there's that one person, like, well, they let that person on, like, are they really for real? Like, you've got to have trust. You've got to have the trust of the team.
It's that times by zero. So if that's what it is, it just null and voids the entire program.
It does. It puts a chink in that armor, bigger than a chink. I mean, I'm not going to go talk to somebody if I think that person's, am I going to get stuck with that person, or are they going to find out? And then they're going to, so much at risk. Like I tell the counselors that I train, it's such a huge responsibility to be a counselor for first responders. It's such an enormous privilege to help those people that are protecting everyone else, but you've got to take it seriously. It's not something you go, I'm going to try this. I'm going to take a couple of responders on and see how it goes. Please just don't. Just don't.
I mean, those that guard the tomb of the unknown, I mean, they take literally a vow for life. So that even when they're no longer, guarding that tomb, they still can't curse. I mean, there's just certain things where they can get their, I think it's the triangle removed. And as a peer support counselor, that is absolutely essential, that you realize that loose lips sink ships. That it's why people don't want to go to peer support, is because that's even greater than going to an outside therapist as far as concerns.
Right.
And one of the other things that comes up with peer support is, should a peer breach confidentiality, they might be removed from being a peer support, but they don't lose
Right.
everything. Whereas as a licensed clinician, I breach confidentiality. I
Right.
can lose my license. I lose my ability to practice.
Practice at all. Yeah.
So
I mean,
really,
there are states who are implementing the fact that peer support will have the same uh, confidentiality rights
right,
as a counselor, and I think that's important. But I think you should treat every peer support team in every state, no matter what the guidelines are there. This should all be treated the same. Someone is trusting you with their vulnerable, what's going on with them. You have a moral obligation to treat that with respect forever. Like you can't use that later, 10 years down the line, and be like, I'm not on the peer support team anymore. Let me tell you what this guy came from.
exactly.
You've taken on an enormous, very important responsibility in that role.
And sometimes a burden. And I, as a
Yes.
clinician that's going to work with first responders, and certainly as a peer support, is that you really need to realize that you're going to be hearing some of the most difficult crap. And if you yourself don't have your own kind of shit in order and
Mhm.
your barrel's full,
Yeah.
not really great to take on a population that by the time they come in, things have typically gone very wrong. They normally
Right.
don't come in when things have gone wrong. They wait for
Getting
the
closer. Yeah.
very wrong.
No, it's that I've waited as long as I possibly can.
Correct.
I don't see what else I can do. We talked about this today with the Warriors Rest guys. I was talking about at what point on this kind of spectrum of, you want someone like a counselor is supposed to go to their own counselor. I do suicide interventions with responders, and I hear their horrible stories, the ones that they've gone through that are sticking with them, keeping them awake at night. I have all those in here, so
Yep.
I have my own therapist, and every counselor is supposed to have their own,
Yep.
especially someone who works with responders because of those stories. Um, but so the peer support should have that as well. You should have, the peer support coordinator should have that as well. I was going somewhere with that, and I'm 54 and I have no idea where I was going with it, or where.
And it will
I
come back
had
in between, like some hot flash. Typically, I know for
mind
me.
and
It was,
go, how was I
oh,
saying?
yeah, that's right.
That's something that triggered that, and then I just went off on I don't know what I was talking about.
How many hours is a peer support training for you? Like,
So what I'm working, so it's not released yet. I'm still developing, but we've got it at a 24-hour program for the peer support teammate and 30 for the peer support leader. And then I can't decide between 1 and 2 hours for command staff. Just to, like, I'm going to concentrate everything I can into a 1 hour, kind of get them to buy in, and then hopefully they would take the leader training just so they'd have the knowledge. Because I think command staff, even though they're not going to be on a peer support team, they would benefit greatly from having the knowledge.
absolutely.
Anybody's going to come to them at any point. They have all the knowledge they could possibly have from a peer support training standpoint, but they're also going to buy in more if they really understand what it's about. But anyway, 24 for the teammate and 30 for the leader is kind of what I have 6 weeks until its release date, so it may change, but that's what it's looking like it's going to be.
Very cool. And for a clinician, how long is that program? Is it 50 hours?
50 hours for the clinician, the fully licensed clinician. That's the one in our directory, the one we refer to, the ones we send to CopLine. Then we have the 2 other tiers. The associate is 40 hours, and it's for non-licensed people in a counseling role, which could be a clinician, it could be a counselor that's still under supervision, still working under supervision, trying to finish up their licensure, all those hours of supervision. But it could be a chaplain. Anybody in a counseling role that's not one of the licensed clinicians is a 40-hour program. And then we have the supporter one is 20 hours, certified first responder supporter. And that's for anybody else who interacts with first responders. So it could be the receptionist at a department, or, anybody, basically, friends and family, anybody who wants to understand them a little bit better.
So one of the requirements is a ride along. Is it
Yes.
ride along with police, ride along with fire, ride along with EMS, or pick your?
I let them choose. I have a lot of former career responders who are now have gone into counseling, whether they're at master's level or doctorate level, and they're like, look, I did a 25-year ride along. I don't have to do that part, right? And I'm like, yes, you do. I never waive any part of it for anybody. If you were a cop for 25 years, go with the fire department, go sit with the 911 dispatcher. I only require a 4-hour ride along as part of the program, but I tell them, you need to do this continuously. Go with a different one every time. And since we've had COVID, we had to actually put, because they were restricted, we had to, and I still wanted it to be a requirement, because I think that's just the most valuable experiential learning possible.
Absolutely.
We had to find a substitute. So I had to put in here's what you can do since you can't go on a ride along. And we have them watching the responder point of view documentaries, where you're watching them live in real life. They have to watch at least 3 documentaries, articles, or interview a command staff and a frontline staff, the personnel, of any of the disciplines, to get and they have a list of questions to help them with the interview and that sort of thing. And they have to write up this is like their final project. They have to write up not just like a book report of what they did, but how they're going to apply it to their practice, how they're going to apply it to seeing a first responder in the counseling session. Like, what did you learn that gave you insight, and make them really be insightful and assess how this affected them, how it's changed their thinking. I get a lot of them saying, this really changed my thinking about first responders. And I love that. I love when they say, this is what I did think. I've been watching the news or whatever. And now that I've gone here and I've talked to them, and they're scared. They're scared to go on the ride along, and they'll go and they'll talk to them, or they'll interview, or they'll call, whatever. And they're like, this was the most enlightening thing I've ever done. And I'm like, good. Like, you're getting it. They're really learning.
When I had spoken before we went live on the Knight and Rusty Armor, one of the things that I then had was a whole list of questions that the recruits had to answer. And it was just really fascinating for them to have to really look at themselves. I mean, I'm excited to have you read the book, and
yeah, I can't wait to read it.
I'll certainly tell you what the questions are. But trying that is so true. That insight is huge, huge.
And I make them do that after they've taken all this program. It's that's why they think it's their final project, I guess, is I don't want them to do the ride along first and then go through the training. I want them to have have gained this knowledge over the course of their 50 days that they're in the program or whatever, and then apply it in the ride along. A lot of them have said, this reiterated things I learned in the program. Like, this ride along was, that he was just like you said he would be. And I'm like, good. I'm glad I did that in that order. I want them to take those bits of information that they've gained through the program and take it into the ride along to strengthen their learning and to make it real.
How long do you make them ride for, the shift?
Well, I put a minimum of 4 hours, and then that's like, I don't want anybody who does the bare minimum of anything. If I say minimum of 4 hours and somebody just goes, yeah, I just did the 4 hours, I'm like, I suck. I almost cussed. I just like, oh, good. Can be myself on here. Yeah. Oh. Okay. So get the fuck out. I don't want, if somebody just says, I just was afraid, and so I only did the 4 hours, and I had them take me back to my car.
That's not going to fly.
Not the requirement, but you suck. Like, go do it again. Like, go do it, and then do it next month, and do it again, and keep doing it. Because
because if you're not comfortable in there, that will certainly reflect, because this isn't, just like when you're a first responder, it's really not a career. It becomes a way of life. It is how they view the world. It is part of their soul. And I think the same thing for a really good clinician is that this is a calling. This is in my entire body. It's how I live my life. It's how I raise my kids. It's how I view the world. Um, and if you came into my office, I also have the neutralizer from Men in Black, the flashy thing, because
You have
so,
your Wizard of Oz and your
I know I've got the Wizard of Oz. I've got my little Moj
gotta
monkey.
go see your office.
It's like tchotchke central.
Right.
So, but that had such a profound effect on me at the end of Men in Black, where they've been fighting these aliens which nobody else can see and what have you, and now it's time to retire, and you get to hit that button that erases all the bad memories.
Yeah.
I think that's exactly.
Imagine that. I hate to say this on a podcast. Went through a breakup one time where it was really just pissed me off is what it did. And I wanted to go to hypnotherapy and just remove, I went and I was like, just remove every memory of him ever. And it had been like a 4.5 year, and he's like, not really how this works. And I said, make it how it works. He's like, that's not really how it works. We're just going to change your reactions to things. Well, all it did was make me super pissed off. Like I was just, then it was just really angry instead of just kind of angry. But I just wanted to like erase everything. And I'm like, this is what, and they think EMDR does. I'm like, doesn't erase the memories. Like you still have, nothing erases your memories other than clearly old age.
and a really good TBI.
Right.
Well, we're really not rooting for.
That seems a harsh way to go about it. But yeah, I'm like, it would be so nice when they retire to go, okay, fresh start. Exactly. Be happy, run free in the pasture,
Exactly, where you get the Hawaiian shirt, the baggy shorts, and you're out of here. And you're with your wife and your kids, and like everything's good.
Right.
And that's
typically the way it goes.
And that was just so I have it in the office. So they're cops. So of course the immediate thing is, why do you have a vibrator in here? Because
free time on my hands.
I'm like,
what do you think therapists do in between sessions? No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Okay, sorry.
But the gallows humor, like I expected from them. I'm like, yeah, here it is. Yeah, like when I go over there, they're like,
okay,
here it is, man.
Part out. Go ahead.
What you've been waiting for. And it just so ruminates actually with them. But you can kind of see, because the eyes are the soul, you could just see when I put that up and it flashes the red thing, just how they wish, how that part of them just wishes that it was that easy.
Oh, I can unsee those things. That would be ideal. Unfortunately, not the way it works.
And that's part of, when you deal with training clinicians, I think those of us that work with first responders really have, we are tasked and we have a responsibility to them to help them understand that this is going to change their lives forever.
Yes.
Because what they hear,
so many ways,
the good, the bad, the ugly, but what they hear, they can't unhear. We don't typically see it, although I have a lot of guys that will bring in pictures. That it's been interesting. Some of my older cops, one of them had retired. He's a New York City police officer, and he literally brought in this shoebox, and in it were all of the absolutely horrific incidents that he had seen over the years.
Really?
And he said, I need to feel. He said, they mean nothing to me, but I've kept them for all of these years. It was just amazing. And then I had several others that had photo albums, and part of me asked them, because once I found out about the shoebox, I then began to ask about whether or not they kept, when you hear about serial killers and they have the mementos or whatever, like, what did you keep? And I was amazed at what people had kept that they had never talked about, and some had never even thought about.
Interesting.
My guys that one of my officers who just seemed to be the guy who is on every motor vehicle fatal that his department had. And he would go on the kids' Facebook pages years and years later to just see what the parents had posted, to see what was going on. It was just, and that's part of what we as clinicians are tasked with, is being able to ask them how these people stay alive
Right.
because they live inside of them. So this officer did a really unique thing. So he had gotten promoted. So he cut off all of the silver buttons from all of his shirts as a patrolman, and he went back to every location and left a button to let them know that he never forgot about them.
Wow.
And it really
Wow.
wasn't until
That's
that.
a healing way of doing that. Like that's not just I need something
Absolutely.
to
Yeah.
market. That's
Correct. And each
healing.
person is different, and that's what it was. I mean, and that took work in therapy. I mean, we had gone through substance. It's like brilliant man, amazing man, and yet was just so tortured. And being able to kind of do work that said, why are they still there for you? Do you think maybe they're there because they're helping you, not you're helping them?
Right.
And it really, and then he figured out a way of being able to say goodbye and tell them that he was going to be okay.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
powerful.
It's just, there's such an amazing population because they truly feel so deeply. And yet they are so closed off. But when they come into a session, it is truly our job to be able to go as deep as they can.
Right.
And you talked about having, being in therapy yourself. People always say to me, do you see a therapist? Well, wouldn't I just be full of shit if I told you that you should see one and I don't?
I didn't go see one.
I mean,
Right. No, I'm fine, but you need
right.
to go. That actually just reminded me where I was going a while ago with the
Yep. Go ahead.
spectrum of we were talking about, I said at what point, and I was asking them in their opinion, at what point is somebody good to be on a peer support team? Because they have to have been through their own shit. They have to have gone through something. Otherwise, everybody's going to be like, you have no idea. You can't help me. You've never even gone through anything. No one wants to hear you. So they have to have gone through their own, but at some point, and then there's the healing process. So from time of incident or incidents to time of healing, if you're going through counseling or whatever, you get to a point where you can't, in this stage, you can't hear other people's trauma because you're still so wrapped up in your own or trying so hard to fight off your own. But you get to a point of healing. If you're going to counseling, if you're using resources, you get to a point where you can tell that story without breaking down. And you can tell that story and say, but I'm healing from it. And you get to that point, and that's when you start to, and beyond that is when you can help other people. But otherwise, you're just going to be triggered and you're going to be useless and you're probably going to do harm because you're going to transfer back and forth. But we're trying to say, like, where's the deciding point on that? It's obviously different for everyone, but they were kind of in agreement with me. Like, you've got to have gone through something and you have to have worked through it where you can talk about it without being triggered by it. You have to have healed. Absolutely. In whatever way you do that, the counseling, the EMDR, whatever it is, you get there. And once you're to a point where that someone else's story that's similar to yours is not going to make you break down. And so now we have two of you to deal with, where you're actually healed enough that you can help someone else. You have to meet all those criteria in order to be helpful to someone. That's kind of where I was going with that.
The other side, and spot on. That's what, Javier and Kathy, who well, that peer support couple who've been on the show, that they discuss that and the importance of that. But the flip side of that is the blind spot.
Yes.
So, as we were talking about, therapists. So for me, I always teach people, that I don't have a therapist. I keep a team of people, that you really need to be able to make sure that you got supervision so that, I'm clinically competent and I haven't hit blind spots, and that my own shit that has to be processed out gets processed out, because I can only take somebody as deep as I've gone. So
Right.
I can't have a whole lot of stuff in there that
Right.
I haven't wrung out. And when it hits on something that I haven't, I need to be able to process it. And if I can't process it, I need to transfer the case. Because
Right.
the other part is that blind spot, whether it be peer support or a licensed clinician. And that blind spot keeps us avoiding. So that as soon as we get into something that is potentially difficult, and we realize that it's kind of funky, it's not, we don't lose it, we just avoid it. And
Right.
then we send that subconscious message to the person that says, I'm not okay dealing with this. It's the
Right.
whole question about suicide,
Mm-hmm.
which is this belief of, you know, uh, that if you ask somebody, are they thinking of killing themselves, that we're going to be putting the thought into their head.
Right.
And when I've got my patients, I always say to them, because I've typically asked that question, it's
Mhm.
like, what'd you have for lunch? Are you thinking of killing yourself? Your hair looks good. Yeah, it's just,
Right.
it's all in
Part
there.
of the conversation. Me too.
Exactly.
You have to get comfortable with it. And once you are,
Yeah, no,
you're
it's,
making everyone else uncomfortable.
a-
Yeah.
and I said, and so I'll say to that patient, I'll say, when I asked you if you were thinking of killing yourself, did you get pissed off at me? It's like, no. I'm like, did you feel like just walking out? It's like, no. I'm like, did you feel like I missed the mark and I'm like fucking clueless? It's like, no. I'm like, did I put an idea into your head that you didn't have? It's like, no. I'm like, then why are you avoiding it?
Yeah. That's
And
what I
when it,
teach in my classes. Like if you're having a good day or everything's going fine with you, and I come up and I think something's wrong, and I say, you've been off lately, or I know you're going through a lot. Are you thinking about suicide? Of course, I'm not going to walk up and say that, but in the
right,
course of
mhm,
talking with someone, if I say, "Are you thinking about suicide?" and they're not going to be like, "Well, no, but now I am."
right,
You know what I mean? Like that is not how that works. You're not
exactly.
going to make that a good idea to someone who hasn't been thinking about it,
But
who
I will
who
tell
ha-
you,
doesn't already think that.
I'll tell you what we have found, because obviously, when we train, for CopLine, that is an important factor, is being able to ask, that question. Is, a caller had called and, kind of, was talking and had dropped um, some
Signals.
clues, and our listeners said, kind of let him go on and went back and said, I'm just wondering, how long have you been thinking of killing yourself for?
Mm.
And the caller said, I'm so glad you asked.
They're always relieved.
Oh,
That's what
because
I find out.
me
You know how
too.
hard it is to say the words, I've been thinking about killing myself. Like that's not an easy thing if someone's been thinking about it, they're carrying it around in their head for a
And
long time,
a-
you know?
and they don't want to burden anybody with it. So if
Right.
you don't talk about it, I'm not going to. It's like learning to be okay. For me, I need to learn how to be okay to watch men cry, because I have a predominantly male practice. And I
Mhm.
really needed to be okay without making the sarcastic comment to break it, because I know they're uncomfortable. But if they sense that I am, then they're going to lock it down, because that's what
They're
they've been
trying to
trained to
protect you.
do.
Right, right. Well, I know a lot of people say I'm afraid to ask the question because I'm afraid of the answer. I'm afraid the answer is going to be yes. Well, you and I aren't afraid of someone saying yes. We're like, okay, that's normal for you to be thinking about that. Let's deal with it. Let's save your life. Let's talk through it. You know, let's give you something else for that answer. You're not going to be like, oh shit, don't think that. I need you to stop. Like, you're not going to freak out if somebody says it. I'm not going to freak out if somebody says, yeah, it's been on my mind. I'm going to be like, okay, that's normal. You've gone through a lot. Let's work through it. Let's talk about
They're
it.
so afraid that they're gonna lose the gun, that we're taking everything, and they're on the rubber
Right,
gun squad. The other thing is, because I do find that with the officers in particular, that they're afraid to ask because they don't know what to do. I said,
right,
well, I can give you the solution. The number one thing is, do not leave them alone. That's it.
Right.
That's it.
Just sit with them.
Like, I don't give a
Mhm.
shit what you do after that. Like
Right.
that in and of itself has truly solved the problem for the moment. The two of you can call a hotline. The two of you can sit back and say, all right, two heads are better than one. Where do we go from here?
Right.
But the key is that they're not alone. And then
Right.
I say to them, you don't ask the question. You find out that they died by suicide. Now I need for you to talk to the spouse. Horrified, horrified,
Yeah,
horrified.
okay, I'll ask. Yeah.
But it's like, they're going to go to the funeral. Like that heavy burden of a suicide can be avoided by a comfort of, it's not a comfort, by being able to tolerate the discomfort of asking the question.
Right. Right. Yeah.
I mean,
And not everybody's cut out for that. Like I teach suicide intervention all the time, and I don't know, Dr. Thomas Joyner.
no,
He runs a suicidology lab. He's written myths about suicide and why people die by suicide, all these things. So he and he's very great. He's done a lot of research on law enforcement and first responders and suicide. And so he shared like a Dropbox with me full of great stuff. And he's going to review a sequence thing I'm working on, a proactive sequence. But I use his material in my class, Suicide Explained, to explain the why behind the why, what leads people up to suicide, to help a lot of it is to help people who have lost someone to suicide. But also, if you know the why that leads up to it, you can have an awareness of when someone is there.
Yeah.
And so you see that, and then to ask that question, like you said, it's hard unless you understand it all and you see, this person's going through this is a normal on that path, this thought is normal. I'm just going to ask. And almost every time I've ever asked that question, they are like, oh my God, yeah, I am, but I wouldn't have told you, or whatever. And
Exactly.
it's a communication that's really uncomfortable for a lot of people. But if you can, it's more like you said, if you acted nervous about it or uncomfortable about it, they're going to be.
Right.
Just as if anything they were sharing, they're going to be like, ooh, that's freaking her out, I'm not going to tell her that. But if you're like, hey, so you've been going through a lot, it's normal. Like that's a lot. You're carrying around a lot that can weigh you down. It can make your thinking cloudy. You don't have clarity. You can't find solutions in that. Like, have you thought about suicide? They'll be like, oh my God, yes, I have. And then like, and you can just see them like, oh my
Absolutely.
God, I've actually been able to tell someone,
And that
You're like,
piece of, they are caregivers just like we are.
yes,
So that if
protectors.
they see my discomfort, they are immediately going to go into the role of, I need to take care of her.
Right. Right. It's why they don't go home and talk about, well, this is what I saw today and this is what I went through. And they're like, one, they don't want to talk about it again. They lived through it. They don't want to deal with it but they don't want to tell all the details of, well, there was this kid who was bleeding and the spouse is gonna be like, oh, no, never mind.
Yeah.
Okay, well, never, they learn not to tell. They learn not to share those things because of people's reactions, I think.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It is more of a protection. And then they don't realize that their marriage starts to suffer. And
But
then
anything you're not communicating to the person that you live with starts to build walls. There's a brick here and a brick there. Anytime your spouse, I'm not married, but anytime, but I know stuff. Anytime you're not sharing something with, or that your spouse can sense something's going on and you're not sharing that, that communication is key, right? In relationships. I mean, that's like, you have to have communication.
Right.
If the officer would just go home and say, look, it was a rough day, I don't really want to talk about it, but I'm kind of replaying it in my head, then the spouse could be like, okay, I'm now part of what's going on, but I don't need the details, but I at least understand. But most of the times they'll be like, I'm fine, I'm fine. And the spouse knows they're not fine, but they're not sharing, and that just builds walls. It doesn't matter if the spouse, that's not an officer, had a bad day and comes home from work, and the officer says, what's up? And the spouse is like, nothing, I'm fine. That's a wall. And the more of those you have, then you add in all the other reasons they have, different shifts and little time together and all of that.
So
That
you
just
know it.
breaks
So you
down
know it.
so fast.
You know what FINE stands for.
Yes. I'm not going to say it. You can say it. This is your show. You say it.
Fucked up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional. So most of the time, the cops are absolutely fine, but it is for the spouse to realize it is a different kind of fine than the
We know what it means.
than
We
the-
know we know the code word.
exactly. Fine is the code word.
The dog barks at midnight and I'm fine. Mm. Right.
So for the, I want to be able to make sure that the listeners know how to access the videos, access you, be able to help their departments. So please give out the information so that we can
Okay.
help get the word out, because this is
Sure.
so important.
Awesome. All right. So I'll start with the counselor program. You probably don't have a lot of counselors, clinicians watching, but firstrespondercounselor.com is the training program for clinicians to become culturally competent to work with responder clients. CERT, CERT as in certified, certpeersupport.com is the peer support training program. And then Academy Hour, just academyhour.com. All of our, starting January 1st this year, I'm pretty excited. We finally reached the point, which has been a goal of mine for several years of doing this. As of January 1st, all of our mental health, all of our classes, we have leadership classes as well, but all of our online classes for first responders on academyhour.com are free to responders everywhere.
Phenomenal. And a phenomenal website. Truly, truly phenomenal.
Thanks.
So is there anything that I did not ask you that you wanted covered?
No, you're awesome. I'm glad we've chatted. I'm glad I've gotten to know. I tell people about CopLine all the time, but no, I think these programs are being released soon, like support groups and the peer support things are released soon. But anybody who wants to go take the Academy Hour classes, like I love that I'm able to give those away. So I really want to help. I want to do good in the world. I want to help. I have a heart for first responders and I just want to do everything I possibly can to help. I advocate everywhere I go for them. Received my own month's worth of hate mail during the riots and that sort of thing, but I don't care. I keep advocating.
And you did the
I
right
am going to
thing.
do everything I can. Last year I sold, my house and all my belongings and went full-time RV life for the entire year so that I could teach a 6-hour class all over the country called The Trauma of Being a Cop and Trauma of Being a Responder. I mean, I love it that much. I want to just do everything I possibly can to help. So
You are
anything anybody, any department needs that I can help with or that I can collaborate with you, stuff, like happy to do it.
you are an amazing gift, and I cannot thank you enough for taking your time to do this tonight.
Absolutely.
And
Glad
just
to do it.
to continue your mission. And we've got miles to go together. I might not be your RV buddy, but I will certainly meet you in whatever location. I'll be at a
I
little
don't have an
bit.
RV buddy. Let's just make that clear. It's just me, and I like it that way.
Anyway, thank you very
Both
much.
of me.
Perfect. And I will see everybody next week on Steph Therapy 911 with Stephanie Samuels.